This video goes over local storage again, and it creates everything that you see on the web page at the left using JavaScript. You've got your opening and closing HTML tag, and everything's in the head. As you can see, here's your opening and closing body tags, but there's nothing at all in there because JavaScript makes it all. Oh, actually, there's a couple of things that is not in a JavaScript tag, but it's still in the head. In the head tag, we have the word notes with the colon and the space, and that's right here on the page. Then you have an opening and closing select tag pair, and that creates this drop down list that only has one thing in it. Right now it's called shopping list. Next to that, we have an opening and closing button tag with the words inside on the face of the button, add new list, add new list. And then there's a break tag right here so that we go down to the next line and we see an opening and closing text area tag pair. And that's this whole area right here that you see carrots and raisins. That's the text area that the user can type in. Then we have a style opening and closing style tag, and the only thing that I styled in here was the text area. So you use the name text area, and inside we have all of these inside of the curly braces. We set the width to 300 pixels, the color to blue, the border to 10 pixels, green outset, the padding to 10 pixels, the margin top of 5 pixels, the font size of 25 pixels, resize is set to none, and height is set to 500 pixels. Okay, so you can change any of those to whatever you want. Close up the style. And let's look at the script. Well, actually, before we look at the script, let's look at the functionality of this little project. You see carrots and raisins. This is auto-populated because carrots and raisins is in the hard code. It's coded in there. So besides carrots and raisins, let's get some milk and bread and steak and eggs and juice. Now, I don't have to push any buttons to make this work. I don't even have to hit the refresh here in the browser. I can just close out of this page, and I was using Firefox, so in my Notepad++ code editor I'm going to hit run, but I'm going to choose Firefox to launch because that's what I'm using. You should see everything that we created. No problem. Now, let's see what the Add New List button does. It says Note Name. This is going to allow us to create a new note, if you will. I guess everything that we create is a note, a to-do list or whatever. So let's say exercises. We're going to call this one exercises. Click OK. And now we have a new option. We have a shopping list and we have exercises. So let's say, jumping jacks, sit-ups, push-ups. What else do we want to do? Let's say weights. Okay, and let's close out of it, run it in Firefox again, and we have our shopping list with everything else that I added and our exercises. So pretty cool. Let's go back to the shopping list and let's take a look at our code now. We're going to open up the script tag. Here we're using the let instead of var. Normally I'm used to seeing var list equals and create the variable called list that way, but in this code that I found, it's using let instead of var. So the first variable we create, let list equal document.querySelector, parentheses, double quote, select, and end that statement with a semicolon. So here we're using document.querySelector to target our select element, which is, again, it's this drop-down list. Then we're going to create, and so the variable that we're going to use to manipulate that is called list. Then we're going to use note as a new variable. Let note equal document.querySelector text area. So whatever's in our typable area is going to be referred to as note. And whenever we're dealing with our drop down, that's going to be referred to as list. So every time we maneuver list, we're maneuvering this. Every time we maneuver note, we're maneuvering whatever's in this, in whatever particular note we're dealing with. After that, well, let's see, did I read that? Let note equal document.querySelector, parentheses, double quotes, text area, semicolon. And then we're creating also a variable called state, let state. And we didn't assign it to anything. We just created the variable let state, semicolon. Now, those are the three variables that we're creating globally so that all of any functions has access to it. I'm going to squeeze these three statements a little closer together and show you the main pieces and parts here. After the variable creation, we have a function called setState. It has one single parameter called newState. And then down here we call the function setState. And in the parentheses, when we call the setState function, every single time setState is called, something is put in the parentheses that will be called the argument that replaces newState. Okay, so in this case, we replace newState with this part right here. It says JSON.parse, parentheses, localStorage.getItem, parentheses, and double quotes, capitalized notes. Now, when we use localStorage.get, we are getting whatever the value is of something in local storage by pulling out the key. So we're creating a key called notes here. Well, actually, we are retrieving something by retrieving a key called notes, and we'll get into more of that later. Another thing that we're going to look at is an event listener. We're creating an event listener for the list, which again, that's dealing with list is dealing with our select element. So here, this drop-down list, which is created using a select element, we're creating an event listener, and it's going to listen for the change event. So when we change anything in here, like right now, it's exercises, we changed it to exercises. When I clicked shopping list, we changed it to shopping list. So we're going to do some code that's going to listen for the change event. It's going to do something every time we change something in this list. Okay, we'll get to that. After that, we have the same, well, not the same, but a similar thing. An event listener is going to be tacked on to, remember when we created note, it had to do with the text area. So any changes we make to the text area here, which is what we call a note, we want to add an event listener for the change event on note, again, which is referring to our text area here. Okay, so we'll get into what that code does here momentarily. Lastly, we'll go over an event listener that is going to listen for the click event of what's over here on this. Now on these other event listeners, we used a variable to refer to, let's go back up here, list was the variable that referred to document.querySelector of the select, and note referred to document.querySelector of the text area. Well, we did not create a variable for the button here, but we can do the same thing by going document.querySelector button. We just didn't give it a variable to refer to, but document.querySelector button dot add event listener. So we're adding event listener to the button, and it's the click event that we're going to respond to. We have code for that. So let's take a look at what all of these codes, I gave you the main idea of what the codes are going to do, and each dot here represents a section of code that belongs to itself. So now let's go ahead and open each one of these up and look at them in more detail. Let's look at the setState function that ends right there. Okay, so function setState parentheses newState. NewState is the parameter. It's got a single parameter set state is the name of the function. The opening curly brace is is holding everything that's going to happen in the function. The first thing that happens in the set state function is we have list. Again, here's list, referring to this, dot text content equals an empty string. After that, we have a for loop. And the for loop goes from this curly brace to this one. And what is in the parentheses is what our for loop is based on. Let, remember we're creating a variable when we see the word let instead of var, let name of object.keys, and then in parentheses new state.notes. So that's in parentheses. New state.notes is in its own parentheses, and then we have an opening curly brace. We have 4 statements that are going to loop over and over and over again in this for loop. The first statement is let. Again, we're using let to create a variable. Here we created the variable called name, and everywhere that you see that highlighted, we're using it. And here we're creating a variable called option, and everywhere that you see option, we're using that variable. Okay, let me reread this again. Let option equal document.queryElement, parentheses and double quotes option, semicolon. The next thing is option.textContent equals name, semicolon. Here we have an if condition. If, and remember with if conditions, if whatever is in the parentheses is true, then whatever follows will be executed. If this is not true, then the statement after that will be ignored and it will move on to the next line of code. If new state.selected double equals name, that's true, then option.selected equals true. We're going to set the option dot selected to true. Then after that statement executes, we'll do this one. List.append child parentheses option semicolon. Now that's the end of the for loop. So it's going to do all these 4 statements over and over again as long as this is going on in the parentheses. After the for loop is done, it's going to do this statement. Note.value equals new state.notes, and in square brackets new state.selected semicolon. After that we have localStorage.setItem, and then in parentheses we have notes. Now this when we use localStorage.setItem, we are setting a key value pair. So this will be the key. The word notes, capitalized notes in double quotes. After the key we have a comma, and then this would be the value that belongs to the key. And here we have JSON.stringify parentheses new state. New state is in its own parentheses, and then the outer parentheses is everything that setItem is going to be dealing with. And that whole statement with the semicolon. And then finally, the very last statement that gets executed in the set state function is state equals new state. So whatever the value of new state is, by the time we get to here, it's going to go into this state variable, which we created way up here. Let state, remember we didn't set it to anything. Well, we're doing a bunch of things right here, and by here we have a value for it. That's the end of the set state function. Now let's move on down to the rest of it. Actually, let me close it. Let's look at the call. When you create a function, it's like writing a recipe. It's not doing anything right now, it's just giving you the recipe. If you want to actually have the finished food from the recipe, you have to follow the instructions. So when you call the function by its name, you're executing the instructions here. So let's open it up. We call set state. We have to replace the parameter that the state was created with an argument, and here's the argument. JSON.parse parentheses localString.getItem parentheses notes. Now when you use localStorage.getItem, you're retrieving the key value pair by pulling the key. So localStorage.getItem notes is the key, and so this whole thing, JSON document.parse localStorage.getItem notes is the new argument to the setState function. Now here's the OR symbol. So you're either going to get whatever was created in notes, or here in curly braces, this looks like an object to me. In between the curly braces, you have two sections in this object. You have a notes section, as you can tell, notes, colon, and then you have selected colon. Well, everything about notes will be on that side of the comma. The comma separates the different parts to the object. So there's two parts to this object. This is the first part, notes, colon, and then in its own curly braces, you have shopping list in quotes, colon, carrots, \n, raisins in quotes. So this is carrots on one line and then raisins on the next line. The \n gives you a new line. So if I actually go back to shopping list, that's how we made carrots and raisins default values for the shopping list. This created them. Every single time you refresh your browser, well, no, if you go back to the default state, which would be the state the very first time you used this application, you would see carrots and raisins involved at the very beginning. That's for notes. Then that is dependent on selected being the shopping list. Now right now, if I go to exercises, you don't see carrots and raisins. That's because exercises is selected, not shopping list. This is setting the initial state. All right. This curly brace closes this right-hand side of the OR symbol. This parenthesis closes the parenthesis that gives us the argument to the setState function. And then this semicolon closes the entire setState function call. Okay, so I'm going to close that. Now let's look at this addEventListener for the list. List.addEventListener. Whenever you create an event listener for a certain element on your page, you're going to have a parentheses, and the very first thing is, what event are you listening for? Well, here we're listening for a change in our list. Our list again being this drop-down list. So whenever we change from one to the other, we're listening for that change, and when that executes, we are going to do something. But before we do anything, I want you to pay attention to the rest of the syntax. First, we identify in double quotes what event we're looking for, then we put a comma, and then we have this. It is an empty parentheses, an arrow symbol created by putting the equals and greater than symbol together, and then the opening curly brace that's going to block everything in that what we want to do when the change event for the list occurs. We are going to do this single statement right here, and what the single statement does is it's calling setState again. It's calling that function we created, and this time in the parentheses, we have to replace new state. We have it looks like an object. It's in curly braces. Notes colon state.notes, comma, and here's the selected portion. Selected colon list.value. So in the curly braces is our object. In the parentheses, it's nesting our argument to the function, and then the semicolon ends the statement. So there's the end of the statement. This curly brace is closing up what happens with our change event when it fires off for the list. The parenthesis closes up the event listener. This is responding to the event listener, and then the semicolon closes the whole outer portion of that statement. So that's all that you get to see for the list.addEventListener. Now let's look at the same thing for the note. We have note.addEventListener. We're going to listen for the change event of the note being this right here. I'm changing it right now. I'm making a change to it. And the event listener is noticing that I made a change to it. So what are we going to do? What are we going to do when the event listener notices a change in note? What we're going to do is first we're going to put the comma after the change event in double quotes, and then we're going to put all of these symbols. So we have comma, empty parentheses, arrow, opening curly brace. The opening curly brace indicates what we're going to do. So let's open it up and see what we're going to do. We are going to call setState. So we're going to call this function setState again. We are going to replace the parameter new state with our own argument here, and this time our argument is going to be everything in these parentheses, and again it sure looks like an object. So let me open this up a little bit more. The two parts to this object are notes. You see notes colon and selected colon, and I want to try to put notes on one line and selected on one line. So because here is the comma to separate those two. So let's see if I can do that. Let's see if it's okay that I do that. All right, so in the curly braces we have two things, notes and selected. This whole thing is for notes, and it says notes colon object dot assign. What is object dot assign going to do? Everything in these parentheses. We have an empty object as indicated by the empty curly braces, a comma. Then we have state.notes and then another comma. And then in curly braces it looks like yet another object which has in square brackets state.selected colon note.value. Okay, and then we close up our parentheses. Everything in these parentheses belongs to object.assign. Then we have our comma here to give us the other piece of our object, selected colon state.selected. Okay, and so this curly brace closes up the whole object that has notes and selected in it. This parenthesis closes up the parentheses for the argument for the setState function, and then the semicolon ends this whole section. This curly brace closes up this nest, which is going to let us know what happens when the change event on the note runs. Then this parenthesis closes what belongs to the addEventListener, and then this semicolon closes this whole thing. All right, so there's the note.addEventListener for the change event. Done with that. Now let's take a peek at this last portion. Now, as you remember, the list is a variable that we use that is assigned document.querySelector select, and note is the variable that has the value of document.querySelector Textarea. We didn't create a variable to respond to the button, but this, look at the pattern, document.querySelector button, document.querySelector select, document.querySelector Textarea. Only difference is we're not using a variable to refer to this. We're just referring to it on the left-hand side right before the addEventListener. Here we used the variable .addEventListener. Here we use the variable .addEventListener. Here we're just calling it. We're using document.querySelector button .addEventListener. So we're going to target the button, and then we're using the addEventListener to target the click event of the button. What are we going to do when the button's clicked? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to follow that same pattern that we did here and here. These patterns we used for all of the addEventListeners. So after the click event, we have a comma, we have the empty parentheses, the arrow, and the opening curly brace. Now let's open this up and see what exactly are we going to do when we click the button. Well, we're going to create a variable called name. We're going to use the let keyword. Let name equal prompt, parentheses, and double quotes note name. So the prompt is a pop-up box. Let me tighten this back up. When we click this button, we get a prompt dialog box, and it says note name right here, and that's because we typed in here note name, a string note name. You can type anything you want that you want this prompt dialog box to say up here. Now, whatever gets typed in here, let's see. Let's create a new one. Balloons for party. Now, I typed balloons for party. When I click OK, I gave the variable name a value of balloons for party. Then we have this if condition that says if name. That means if there's a value to name, which if I click this OK in the current code execution, that will be true. So as soon as I click OK, this will be true. I did give it a value. We are going to call setState again. We're going to call that setState function up here that we created. We're using setState throughout this whole thing. So I'm going to click OK. We created a new, now we have another option here in our select. If name setState, the argument for the setState function is everything inside of these parentheses. And again, it does look like that object again. The two pieces of the object are notes and selected, and they're separated by a comma. So let's read the first one. Notes, colon, object.assign. What are we going to assign? Everything in these parentheses. We have an empty object, empty curly braces, comma, state.notes, comma, and then another object that in curly braces, its own curly braces, we have name in square brackets, the colon, and then the empty string as indicated by two double quotes with nothing inside. Again, there's that object. There's that object. If you look in the parentheses, all of that belongs to object.assign. This comma separates the second part, selected colon name. So this curly brace closes up the object that has notes, colon, and selected colon. This parenthesis closes up everything that is the argument to the setState function, and this semicolon closes this whole portion. This curly brace closes everything that is blocked together to execute when the event listener realizes that the click event has run on the button. This parenthesis closes up everything that belongs to addEventListener, and this final semicolon closes up this whole thing. Okay, so with that being said, I've read everything in the script. Here's the ending script tag, the ending head, the open and closing body tag that has nothing, and the ending HTML tag. So again, just to review again, balloons for party, we want red ones, we want blue ones, and we want pink ones, and we want purple ones. So let's close out of it, run it again in Firefox. Now we have all these different, we have a shopping list, we have exercises, we have balloons for party. It's all kind of lists and notes that you want to make. Now let's show you how to set this to the original state. I am in Firefox. Open this up a little bit. Go to the Firefox menu, go down to Options, then go down to Privacy and Security, go down to Cookies and Site Data, Accept Cookies and Site Data, Clear Data. Clearing all cookies and site data stored by Firefox may sign you out of websites and remove offline web content. Clearing cache data will not affect your logins. Check both of those, click Clear. Selecting Clear Now will clear all cookies and site data stored by Firefox. This may sign you out of websites and remove all offline web content. Fine and dandy, Clear Now. Okay, now I've cleared it. Now I'm going to refresh the page. Now, the only thing you have is one little thing. This is the default from our code and our code only. There's no more stuff in local storage. We have the single shopping list that was created by code with the two things that were created as default items in our shopping list. All right, so that finishes with this code, and go ahead and copy it and change it and make it the way you want. Give it the style you want and set the names to what you want, and practice, practice, practice.